This podcast is part of the Deluxe Edition Network. To find other great shows on the network, head over to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. That's deluxeeditionnetwork.com.
The year is 1987, and filmmaker Luis Valdez followed up his iconic, if underappreciated musical Zoot Suit with this biopic of the teenage Chicano rock star of the 1950s, Ritchie Valens. Born Ricardo Valenzuela, the film follows the quick rise of his musical fame and the brief time he was able to enjoy it before perishing in the now infamous plane crash that took the lives of fellow rock stars Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper. Known for its rockin' soundtrack by Los Lobos and making Lou Diamond Phillips a leading man, the film is considered a high watermark in the music biopic genre. But what did our critics think? Tonight on Back to the Balcony, we tackle La Bamba. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony. And welcome to the show. Welcome, Justin, to Back to the Balcony. I hate musical biopics, but you know this.
I do know it, and I don't know. I have a feeling this one might take me by surprise because I'm still looking for that one on this show that you're just gonna fall in love with, and this one is a little obscure. That I think this might be it.
Well, it is it, and I took some time to think about it because there are a handful of biopics that I actually really enjoy because I feel they don't fall down the typical tropes of the ones that we've been talking about in the past. Specifically, Great Balls of Fire, which you brought to the show. You know I have disdain for the Ray Charles one. I've got disdain for the Johnny Cash one, as well as many others. But this is what I figured out. I like this movie a lot. I always have. And I really, really like the Buddy Holly story starring Gary Busey. I think the thing that this film and that film have in common is that both of the subjects of these films died young. Therefore, that short amount of time of fame that they actually had did not allow them to be exposed to the media and to the country for what kind of people they might really have been behind closed doors. Their fame window was so small that the little interpersonal stories that we get about these people are mostly about their rise to fame, but the real story is how quickly it ended. Therefore, we don't get a load of bullshit like we do in Great Balls of Fire, like we do with the Ray Charles movie or the Johnny Cash movie. Just because they wanted to use the songs, those people were still alive, and we had to kind of jump around the truth about what their lives were. I think that might be the caveat. There is a sincerity in biopics about stars that deceased before their true fame demons were shown to the public. What do you think about that?
I 100% agree. Absolutely spot on, because it's the same formula we get over and over again. We go to watch to be depressed, of the rise to fame, to fall from fame. So it's the same thing over and over again. And it depends on the director whether they're going to amplify the negativity out of the stardom versus the story behind the negativity. And you're spot on when you say there wasn't a lot of fame here when it comes to a time frame to really cover a lot of that negativity. There wasn't. I mean, he had 3 hit records. I think it was a span of a year, 2 years, whatever it may be. So there's not a lot here, but this is, for me, a biopic that I liked. I grew to like it even more, but as I grew to like it a little bit more, then grew my woulda, coulda, shouldas on what I would have loved to see from this movie to go a little bit further. So Is it perfect? No, because there is some elements, and the movie teases at this family element that I really wanted to get more of because it was refreshing to have this in a biopic where we have this conflicting family that we don't have drugs, we don't have arrests, we don't have all this stuff that we see time and time again. So to me, I love La Bamba. I love Lou Diamond Phillips and La Bamba, and but to me, I really wish there was some more elements that it really could have just expanded this brilliant man's life.
I agree, but I also think that's a little bit nitpicky. But I'm on the same playing field as you are. I think that what we get might be, embellished a little bit for dramatic reasons. That is how these things often work. What saves it are the performances. So I watch this movie a lot, maybe at least once a year. I got the Criterion just last year when it came out. It's a great disc, a lot of great features. And one of the things that I think I recognize now, and especially talking to other people that like this movie, is that yes, it is Ritchie Valens' story. It is the Ritchie Valens movie, but it's not afraid to make Ritchie Valens the secondary character when it needs to. It really does take the time to focus on the amazing performance by Esai Morales as Bob, his half brother, as well as Rosie, the girl that, he was essentially having a crush on, a relationship with, that got taken away by his brother. And then his mom, who is an interesting character as well, because we empathize with her for raising these kids, and one's good and one's bad. And there's these other little girls too, and living in like the fruit orchards, working these jobs of picking and canning fruit to the rise of Ritchie's fame. But also that conflict of one son is the troublemaker and one son is like the gift from God, essentially. So I think there's a lot of good drama built there without being too cliche, but just cliche enough to let us know that we are watching a biopic. I do wish there was more family stuff, but when I say that, I'm almost saying I wish there was more Bob, because Bob is the centerpiece of this movie, in my opinion. Ritchie is the subject. Ritchie is why we paid the ticket. We want to hear the songs. We want to see the cool car that he gets. We want to see his rise to fame. But he does get outacted and he does get outshined by Esai Morales' performance. And that's not a bad thing. That just makes the movie that much more engrossing because we don't feel like we are watching a sanitized version of a troubled artist and his rise to fame.
So the Bob character, I think this is where it sprouts for me because the Bob character was, to me, the most interesting piece of it because he's the unknown character out of this story. We know the outcome, those that follow music. We know how this is going to end. So naturally, we're going to be attached to somebody that gives us a little bit different taste. And by the end of the movie, I really wanted to see more of the outcome of Bob. So this one, Lou Diamond Phillips, he has an on-screen presence in this that is extremely infectious. His lip syncing is awful, but his facial expressions while he's doing this music, it's so fun that you just can't stop watching it, even though it's a little bit off, and I don't care. You have that fun element to Lou Diamond Phillips, but when it comes to the way the characters were designed, it's a shame, but still enjoyable that Lou Diamond Phillips's character doesn't really take hold versus the supporting cast. So, I mean, to me, it's a little oddball in this biopic that he is a little bit outshined when he's not playing music. So, to me, I think I almost want a Bob movie.
Well, that's the thing about those great side characters that we talk about in the episodes every week is they're a blessing and a curse, right? And he is so good and he's so charming, but at the same time, I don't think he allows it to become the Bob show. He is there to essentially show that he needs love too, but also his way of like breaking out and acting out how it affects the family, how it affects Ritchie, and how it affects the mom. And the leading parts to the end of the movie where there's like a conflict, we really think these brothers are going to just be done with their relationship, actually builds to something really quite sweet and tender, which makes the ending even more tragic. Now, This is where I say the suspension of disbelief in biographical pictures about anybody, you have to really just take that with a grain of salt of whether or not that's true, right? We don't know. It could be just something created by the screenwriter, maybe something that someone said when they were interviewing them for the movie, but I don't care as long as it's done well dramatically. As long as it's not handheld to us like we always complain about. You're not going to sugarcoat a bad guy. You're not going to sugarcoat a bad story and get away with it when I'm watching a movie. But when you make it sincere enough and believable enough, I don't care if it's true. Just represent it well in a movie, represent it well with your performance, and don't treat us like we're 5 years old. And I'm going to respect you for how you're telling the story, regardless of how accurate it is or not. So, whether or not the character of Bob in this movie is 100% accurate, according to the special features that I saw, Ritchie Valens' mom said that visually, Esai Morales channeled Bob extremely accurately. But there were a lot darker stories that aren't told, and we can tell. We can tell that at the end of the day, this still has to be a PG-13 movie. There has to be a sense of likability or at least understanding of how and why Bob is the way he is, because the movie doesn't ask us to give him a pass or even redemption. It just wants our heart to break along with him. And I think that's something that Luis Valdez, the director who also wrote the script, did very well. It's a human story, it's human drama, and not once did I feel like I was being given a sugar coated morsel of bullshit.
No, it doesn't have filler in it, and that's what I appreciated about it because it could have easily gone down that route of the alcoholism topic, the abuse topic, this focus on the new child and the relationship there. So, but they really don't. And to me, I really during my second viewing, I kind of thought this would have been so easy for the filmmakers to really go down this route because they had to add almost to an extent some filler for uh, Lou Diamond Phillips to really generate this character because again, 17-year-old kid, there's not a lot there except for that year of stardom. So there had to
Mhm.
be some sort of filler, and Bob was the key. And they didn't over exaggerate the Bob character. They didn't focus specifically on him. I think they overwrote him to the point he outshined a lot, but I don't think they overplayed him. And I really did appreciate about that strategy that they use with this. It does feel like a proper balance where they do support each other when it comes to Phillips and our Bob character. So to me, I think the best piece of this movie is the proper balance between the characters, even though some spike up a little bit more in the movie than others.
One thing I can say about Luis Valdez, a filmmaker who I think had a painfully small career, and there's lots of speculations as to why. But I mean, Zoot Suit, which I covered on the Cultworthy, it's such an iconic film in the sense of telling a Chicano story of essentially what's a legend of Los Angeles. During the Sleepy Lagoon murders, you had Edgar James Olmos being introduced to the world as the Pachuco. What an amazing character, an amazing musical. And that movie has such energy. It's all theatrical. It's essentially like a filmed version of the stage play that he made. So this film made me wonder, okay, can a guy who makes such theatrical productions, in my opinion, it'd almost be as if Lin-Manuel Miranda all of a sudden decided to direct a biopic that was a serious movie and not something theatrical. Well, this guy did it. This was his like follow-up movie, and it doesn't reek of that theatricality that Zoot Suit does. Instead, I think it doesn't focus as much on the music as you would think a biopic would, right? Like there's two performance scenes in front of big audiences, and that's it. The rest of the time, when they're playing the music, it's all about him writing or recording or playing in a garage with his friends. They make the music a part of the reality of the story instead of setting up the next grand performance piece, the way that Elvis did, the way that Great Balls of Fire did. We're not waiting for the exhibition, we're waiting for the process. And I think this film did that really well. It's showing us the process of this guy learning how to become a rock star and not giving up, especially coming from a Chicano family, a migrant family that didn't have the access or the affluence that people like Jerry Lee Lewis did, you know? So I think that was really, really, really well done. I'm going to just barely touch on, I'm not going to say the controversy, but there is a lot of talk now about, representation. Lou Diamond Phillips is Filipino, and we don't really ever see him play a Filipino man. He is such an interesting character that can fit so many different archetypes that he's played: Mexican, Native American, Asian. I mean, he is Asian, but there are people who say, well, it's not correct representation if you're not having a Latino play a Latino person. Esai Morales is Bob. Perfect. I am still on the fence of that, where I think if you are a good actor and you believe in the part, but more importantly, the family and the filmmaker believe in you for that part, then I don't see your true problem. He had the family's blessing, and it became iconic for him. So I think representation matters most to the people who it's about, rather than the people who take ownership or credit for that person's ethnicity. What are your thoughts on that?
Two different types of opinions here. So I agree. So when it comes to a biopic or a historical figure, the most important is the blessing of the family. So you have that, do what you want, create your film. When it comes to representation of everybody else, it is hard for anybody on the other side of the table to say who auditioned, who represented to fill this role. I'm not there, so I can't be there to judge. If you have a Latino auditioning and a Filipino next to each other, they both are equally good. No brainer on who we're going to go with.
Right.
So it all depends on the auditioning process. So it is hard to just, it's so easy to judge, but it's so hard to really have an opinion when we're not in the process. I think 100% in the movie, the creator should give his vision, and the characters that he puts in and the actors and talents that they put in should be there as the initial one to deliver that vision. So art, there are so many limitations to art, and it drives me nuts, and it gets so political when it comes down to that. So as long as the message is delivered, the role is properly performed, and the vision is there, I don't really care.
I feel the same way. And the fact that Luis Valdez is such a cultural icon for the Mexican-American Chicano culture, he auditioned 200 actors for this role, and Lou Diamond Phillips won him over because to him, this was the perfect guy to play Ritchie Valens, and the family agreed. What other due diligence do you have to do to make, your picture work, both culturally and artistically? And I'd seen some, people talk about like, hey, well, maybe Esai Morales should have played Ritchie Valens since he was such an amazing, Latin American actor. Well, then it doesn't give us Bob, and Bob is what makes this movie work. I'm sorry. I love Lou Diamond Phillips, and I like the Ritchie Valens story, but this movie does not have a story to tell in all the aspects that we need for the drama to work without the Bob character or without the Rosie character, right? It just can't be Ritchie and Donna because that's boring. That's bland. We do need to show the family turmoil and the racial and cultural turmoil too, which once again, I love when a film can make those points, but not be saturated in the idea of this culture is racist, that, oh, look at what we did to these people. We don't need that hand-holding. We get it. We get it with his performance. When he shows up at her door and knocks and the dad's like there staring, you hear him screaming in the background, that jungle music. It's all we need. We understand. We're not dumb. We understand what people go through back then and today. So once again, I think that stories like this are usually told best by people who've lived that kind of life. I'm not saying that Taylor Hackford couldn't have made this movie. I'm just saying that he couldn't have made this movie the way that Luis Valdez made this movie.
100%. And when we look at representation, I think this movie, when it comes to treating it with the proper respect of the culture, we get examples of that throughout this movie. So, this movie, when it comes to representation, how it's told, this really deep dives into just pure almost an environment of taking us to an looking glass into this family on what their day to day is to an extent. So I think this is probably one of the most respectful biopics that I've seen. So I think the process is done extremely well when it comes down to it.
And they also do a lot with the dialogue where they say that Richie's dad and Bob's stepdad essentially was a Mexican that really wanted to be a true-blooded American. He lived and breathed America. He fought for, his country in America. Therefore, we buy the idea that Richie doesn't grow up speaking Spanish, that Richie is kind of being raised to be an American teen and not hold on to the culture so much that he has to essentially live, eat, and breathe the Chicano lifestyle. His mom just wants whatever is best for him and to be happy. And Bob walks that fine line between both, right? Like Bob still represents the old ways, goes to Tijuana, runs drugs back and forth, but at the same time, really shows the blue collar side of like an American Mexican man. So I think we get to see all sides of it, and we don't feel, at least me, who is part Mexican, I don't feel like there's any lack of representation there. If anything, I think I appreciate the clarity of people that don't want to hold on to a culture and want to be more American or be more in whatever their current surroundings are. Right? It's not xenophobic. It's just people that want to be like the people around them.
So I think you're 100% right. I think when it comes to cultural representation, that this is really going to be a movie to not necessarily focus on the music, but the kind of the backstory to the music without getting into the nitty gritties of how it became to it. Because what I really appreciated about this is we don't have the origin of him going to numerous auditions. We don't get the origin of him working his butt off to really make it in Hollywood. We have this kid that really has a family relationship that really wants to make something of himself. And they use that grandfather as an example or a hope to really drive these two brothers to a success. And there is a hint of wanting to win over the mother as well to be a success. These two characters between Lou Diamond Phillips and the lovable Bob, and I'm not going to use the actor names because I just love saying Bob, is just absolutely just relatable on wanting to be success for not oneself, but for the family. And I think that's an admirable message that the film does portray here. So to me, that is one of the more family friendly messaging that this movie really targets for, and not so much focusing on the topic of the outcome of what happens at the end, which is an emotional wreck for me. But I do kind of wish, and you're going to hate me for this, that I was during a rewatch. I knew it wasn't going to happen, but I really wanted, just like Great Balls of Fire, that High School Musical number that just pop out of nowhere.
How dare you? I mean, but they do treat us to like the phone booth serenade, which is a little cheesy, but apparently really happened in real life. The garage party. I think if I had to say my least favorite scene of the movie, the one that just feels a little bit heavy-handed and false, is the scene where Bob strolls in with his biker buddies in the middle of Richie's first big performance with his band, and then it turns into like a ballroom blitz where like even the straights are fighting with the biker guys. Okay, I'm not going to say it didn't happen, but that was like the only moment where I was like, okay, this is intentional drama to create conflict, and it just seemed a little hokey to me. But honestly, that's like my only real complaint about the validity of the movie and how it represents its characters and its structures. Is there anything that you kind of didn't jump on board with right away?
Yeah, and our critics are going to talk about it, but I'm kind of on the same boat with them. Is the flashbacks, the kind of the visions, I should say in a better word, of the fear of flying. So to me, I think I talked about earlier the filler. I think that was filler to kind of define this character. So to me, I did have problems with that. And I think they utilized it a little too much to kind of prove a point. And it would be fine if they used it to justify fear. And we do see examples of that, but then we see it after we justify the fear. So to me, that did drive me a little nuts on the overutilization of that.
Yeah, I can see that. It's not that I hate it, and it didn't bother me when I was younger, but now looking things through a cinematic eye and a critical eye, since that's what we do on this podcast, I can see why that rubbed them the wrong way. But for me, it's 3 scenes. They're relatively short. It's, at least trying to paint a picture for audience members that can't find it on their own. So it's hand holding, but it's not hand holding throughout the whole movie. It's intermittent hand holding. Hey, coffee lovers, Antonio and Justin of Back to the Balcony here, and we've got something special for you. If you're looking to start your day with the perfect boost, you need to try Bulletproof Coffee. This isn't your average cup of joe. It's packed with high-quality ingredients designed to fuel your body and mind. Whether you're powering through a workout, tackling a busy workday, or just need the extra edge, Bulletproof Coffee has got you covered. And guess what? We've teamed up with Bulletproof to give you an exclusive deal. Use code B2B, that's B, the number 2B, at checkout to save 20% on your order. That's right, 20% off just for being a loyal listener. So don't wait, head over to Bulletproof's website and experience the difference yourself. Your mornings will never be the same with Bulletproof Coffee. Thank you for listening, and now back to the show. With that, let's get to the critiques of our critics, Siskel and Ebert.
The date was February the 3rd, 1959, the day the music died. 3 rock and roll stars were killed in the crash of a small plane that day: Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper. The Buddy Holly story, of course, has already been made into a film, and now here's another movie with the same ending, starring Diamond Phillips, and the story of a Mexican-American kid from Los Angeles who became a rock and roll star and a legend all before he was 18 years old. Now, any review of La Bamba is going to compare this movie with the Buddy Holly story, and I'm afraid there's really no comparison because, let's face it, Buddy Holly was a much more important figure in the development of rock and roll. He had a lot more songs, they were better songs, and the movie of his life is a better movie. But La Bamba is a good small movie in its own way. It shows us a kid who never really had the chance to grow up, to develop into the big star that he showed promise of becoming, and it spends a lot of time exploring his family life, his uneasy relationship with his half-brother. I like those scenes. I also like the scenes with his Anglo girlfriend and the racism that he experienced in his teenage years. The movie is well written, well acted, but the life of Ritchie Valens was not exactly thrilling movie material, and the fact that we know the movie's ending overshadows everything else. All the same, marginally, I do recommend this.
My biggest thing with Roger's review on this is that he's comparing it to the Buddy Holly story, and how he says that Buddy Holly had more life and more songs and all these, other things that he's trying to compare the two. But I think that's actually an impressive feat for a movie that doesn't have as much history to reflect on, to give us the film that it did. I don't care about better songs. I don't care about more performances. I love the Buddy Holly story movie, but I think it's unfair to make that comparison. Luis Valdez created a family drama that focuses around a young rock star who died too soon, and he does it very well. I don't see why we have to say that Buddy Holly is a better movie, because I'm on the fence on that. It's a different movie. It's a different story. I think it's more impressive to work with less and tell more than it is to make a film that has more to tell because there's more out there. I think it's an unfair comparison.
It is an unfair comparison because there is so much material you can do with Buddy Holly, and there's nothing against the Buddy Holly story. I enjoyed it. But here, there is a real challenge. 1, to tell the story of a year of fame, and 2, to make it suitable for everybody, and to really not let the music lose focus on what made this man very special. So to me, there was a challenge with this movie. And I know I kind of nitpicked about the woulda, coulda, shouldas on a lot of the small aspects of it, but that's not to say this movie has close to a 2-hour runtime, and it never feels dull. It never feels boring. It's always energetic. It's always intriguing to watch. To make something of little substance be entertaining to the viewer, that's a win. So Anything Buddy Holly, you can make that into a 6-hour movie with that much material. But here you don't have that much. So kudos to the filmmakers on this one for creating something suitable for everybody and not following the same formula and making it entertaining.
I also think that it's a great move to show and showcase and feature other recording artists of the day, like the Big Bopper, like Buddy Holly, or Brian Setzer's cameo. I think those are all great ways to show us where we're at in rock and roll and all the talent that he had to go up against. And we show him nervous to perform with them because at the end of the day, he's just a high school kid that had talent and a little bit of luck and the right people who finds him. And that's what gets him to where he's at. It also shows us that, like, at the end of the day, too, these rock stars, and this is, pretty historical, they didn't care the fact that he was a teenager or he was Chicano. Talent recognizes talent. And they knew that there was a guy with a future here. And that's what makes the story so much more tragic, is that future was robbed from us. Him and the other people on that plane. So it's an interesting way to tell a movie where everyone knows the ending. Everyone knows what happened to Buddy Holly. Everyone knows what happened to Ritchie Valens and the Big Bopper. So it's what gets us there. Which way are we going to take? Are we going to take this doom and gloom all the way to the end? Or are we going to tell a story about a family and a kid who's really getting it together and the tragedy of what that robs us? Especially when it comes to a family who's chasing after the American dream, right? Buddy Holly wasn't chasing after the American dream. He had it. He was chasing after fame and talent and girls, and that was his story. There is more to tell in this movie because of who Ritchie Valens was and where he came from, and that's what the movie focuses on, as it should. So don't compare it to the Buddy Holly story.
Well, and I love this one scene that we have when you have Buddy Holly performing a fantastic music number, leaves off stage, and we have Lou Diamond Phillips come up, and we don't, to your point, we don't have a lot of interactions between this massive group of talent because it's not needed. And we've talked about this before. All it takes is some smart filmmaking to gather some very good
Right.
looks. And you see them off stage watching the performance of La Bamba. And right then with that look defines no matter 20 words of dialogue that you may have with one single look. And that should be a testament to smart filmmaking here, to know that you have this talent and you don't need useless dialogue to identify what a star is. You don't need that extra filler that we have to put a spotlight, the tempting spotlight on Buddy Holly, because he is brief in this movie, and it should be that way because we already know Buddy Holly's story, and we want to see the recognition of everybody else on this new star that's rising to power.
This is kind of nitpicky, but do you know what one of my favorite aspects of this movie is? That there are no montages. There is no needless montage to show the development of his musical skill or his fame or any of that. All we do is see the family's perception of his fame by watching a television or hearing it on the radio. And we're letting the story be told through the family instead of a cinematic montage. I mean, I love a good montage, but I also think it pulls you out of the drama that a story is trying to create. It's lazy. Montages are lazy in biopics, in my opinion, because watching a film like this, you can see how it can be done without using such cheap tricks as a montage with a rising score behind it. We get it. And this film doesn't take that easy way out. It tells a story through the family, and that's what the movie is really about.
I love that fact too. I do love a good montage, but in a biopic, it's just an excuse to play a full song from the artist. And here we don't get really any full song except for, I think, La Bamba. So
the title.
Yeah, I mean, and it would throw this movie off balance to just have one picked song to have that montage. And you're right. And again, I keep going back to the process of making this movie. They everybody involved knows the balance. They know the vision of what this movie wanted to be, and they wanted the family element, and they wanted this told through the family. A montage does not do that. That focuses on the music, and it is a music biopic, but behind the music is the one driving this music. It's a human movie about a kid that loves music, and that's where the theme is going to stay. And I think it's a well executed. I'm going to create my vision, and this is how it's going to end. It's well done.
Marginally, I recommend it too, and I have the same reaction, which is that the non-singing portions of the movie are better than, frankly, the singing portions. He has only 3 big songs, and that's over fairly quickly, and they save La Bamba for the end. But coming out of the blue is this very powerful relationship with his brother, well played by Esai Morales, an interesting relationship with the stage mother who favors the kid to success and really dumps on the other brother, and those things were good if the movie weren't about a rock star.
You know, there was one structural thing that I didn't like about the movie, and that was prefiguring his dread that he's going to die in a plane crash.
Yes.
I mean, this is a cliche that we can go right back to the Eddie Kitchen story, his fears and so forth, where he wakes up in a sweat and this is going to happen, and then it does happen.
Even if it's true,
it doesn't work. You're right.
It doesn't work. But the film still gets, and you know what I was thinking? What? You have reminded me of a film that people should rent if they haven't rented it, and that is the Buddy Holly story. If you're going to go see La Bamba, rent Buddy Holly story, you'll see an even better film.
Okay, so I might agree that these films work really well together, but I think Gene misses the point. When he says that out of the blue comes this story about this brother and the relationship with Ritchie, no, it's not out of the blue. That's the movie. The reason why there is a lack of musical numbers is because that's not what the movie is about. It is about Ritchie and Bob and the family, and the fact that Ritchie just happens to have this rise of fame for being a rock star. That's like the part that gets us from A to B. It shows us who he is and what he's going for. When he said that he would rather see this film about the family and not about Ritchie Valens being a rock star, he's literally walking face first into the point of the movie. It doesn't have to be about the rock star. This movie honestly could have played without any musical numbers, and we just know that Ritchie Valens is going to be Ritchie Valens, and it still would have worked. That's why there's not so much attention to detail in the musical numbers, because it's not the most important part of the movie. They do what they have to sell a soundtrack, right? I get that. There's a marketing piece behind it. I had the vinyl, I had the soundtrack, lots of people did. I think this movie is what kind of got Los Lobos big in the 80s and 90s, as people heard La Bamba, saw Los Lobos on the record. They started playing some great songs on other movies, and it kind of brought that, Tex-Mex rock and roll to the mainstream. Fine, that's great. That's what got this movie recognized in theaters and recognized in stores and on VHS and on vinyl and on cassette. But it's not the biggest part of the movie. Just like Dirty Dancing soundtrack wasn't the biggest part of the movie. It just happened to be the aftermath of the movie.
Well, and I think he misses a point too. When it comes to biopics, here's kind of the way I look at it is teach me something or encourage me to go out so I can look into it and teach myself. This is one of those movies that teases just enough to really go out and listen to the music, to really go out and research not just the music, but the man, and also Buddy Holly. There's little information given, but there's enough intrigue there to go out and look for yourself. This is not one to, again, spoon feed us. This is one that really does encourage to go listen to music, because I love the fact, and you know me and music and musical numbers in movies is I'm all in, load me up. But here it's just enough to say, they only cut off half that song. I got to go listen to the rest of it. So that is smart, and it really shows respect to the artistry of the music to really have people go out and seek you out. And that's what this movie does. So in terms of the family giving their blessings to not just the cast, but to this movie, they're right, because people are going to seek this out. They're going to seek the soundtrack out. The only nitpick I have with this movie today is it doesn't give enough to really push that except for the music. So it kind of assumes, based on when the time comes out, that everybody knows this story. And how it holds up today, I think the music might crescendo the knowledge seeking after listening to the music, but I think that's part of my nitpick is how it holds up today. As a movie, it's fine. But when it comes to the seeking out knowledge, I think it could have pushed a little bit more on the knowledge basis of it just to say stay current today.
It's a good point. And also, here's the thing, too. Some movies are just meant to have a longevity longer than other films, right? Like if it's something off of a classic novel or literature or something that was groundbreaking with special effects, those movies have a tendency to have a longer half life than other movies do, right? In the 1980s, we have to remember that this was probably just 30 years removed from the actual event. There's still people of that generation alive that have nostalgia for it. But now we're 30 years later, a lot of those people aren't here anymore. And so people that champion this movie are people our age who are younger when it came out. And we're trying to get more people to watch it with an appreciation. And it's hard where not many people younger than us know who Lou Diamond Phillips is. They don't know who Ritchie Valens is. They don't know who Esai Morales is. You know, that I think is the challenge where if you have something that's set in a time that's so relevant to the generation that lived through it, you have to expect eventually for that to wear off. And then new audiences are going to have a harder time finding it and appreciating it. Star Wars will always be around one way or another. Same with Star Trek and even Rocky to an extent, right? When you can build a franchise, when you can have a longevity of pop culture, that's what's going to keep your movie relevant. And it's so weird to me to think that one of the biggest movies of the decade that I was born in and lived through has become so like obscure and not talked about because it's an oldie now. I mean, Nirvana is on the oldie station where I live. That blows my mind. And this is 30, 40 years prior to that. So it's just, again, it's almost become a tchotchke. It's almost become like a theme restaurant from the 50s where like the Wayback Machine, back when rock and roll was born. And it doesn't help that Ritchie Valens wasn't as controversial a character as people like Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis, because those movies can keep getting made and made and made because people like the tabloid-esque stories that they have to tell. This was a good kid who died young. He didn't leave a legacy of nonsense and troublemaking and statutory rape like so many rock stars that we hold on golden idols, right? None of that's there. So it does make sense that that kind of fades away over time. But it shouldn't, because this movie's really good. The performances are great, and goddamn, the music's great. So it might not be the high watermark of musical biopics today, but I think in the grand scheme of biopics throughout the history of cinema, it's pretty high up there.
I agree. And this would be kind of my take on the music is this music never gets old. This music is timeless, even though we're looking at a year of Valens singing these songs. But the first time when we have him in that record studio where he's singing Come On, Let's Go, it's just the facial, the energy, the passion he puts into the music, just goosebumps. And this one would be a great movie to introduce even Buddy Holly music to a younger generation to really appreciate where this music is kind of originated from to an extent, to really show the passion and the fun people have with this music, not just listening to it, but singing it. Because even when he's in 60 takes of this song, there's still a love and passion around it. And to me, it is just infectious.
I think too, and I don't want to sound like a music snob or anything, but this early style of rock and roll, we have to remember that these were like 3-4 chord songs that all had the same structure. They all had the same, verse, chorus pattern. It was really up to the performer's style, charm, maybe lyrics. But at the end of the day, all these songs were almost interchangeable if you just listened to them and not recognize who the artist was. This is before psychedelic music kind of changed everything, like with the Beatles and Pink Floyd, right? So Are the oldies rock and roll songs just a little cookie cutter? Absolutely. That's exactly what they were. So then you just have to rely on the person singing them and their charm and what made them unique. And this guy's gimmick, sad to say, was he was young, he was Chicano, and his biggest hit was one of the first songs recorded in Spanish to people that didn't even know you could sing rock and roll in Spanish. It was a gimmick song. That's kind of the point, but it will always live on because we know what it is. It's infectious. I can tell you that people probably know La Bamba, the song, and don't even know who sing it, but they know the song. And this movie, that might be what brings it back is, hey, you know that song that everyone knows it's in Spanish? Did you know that was a 17-year-old kid and there's a movie about him? If that's how we have to sell this movie to the younger generations, I'm fine with it. Just get them to watch it.
Just that pitch alone, I mean, you got me sold. I'll watch it again. So, but I think that it's 100% right. This movie can cover a lot and really show the appreciation for the music. And not only that, but the filmmaking process, because we both praised the balance and when it comes to how the story is told. So you knock two birds with one stone by watching La Bamba.
Agreed, 100%. So when it comes down to how do I think the critics handled it? Well, they marginally both gave it a thumbs up. At least they told people to go see it. At least they gave it credit where credit was due. For Gene, though, I think he has the biggest problem here where he's always trying to compare it to something else. That's like his biggest go-to when it comes to a movie that he either doesn't fully understand, but maybe he likes it, but he didn't like it well enough to rave about it, so he has to find something. It's like a health inspector in a restaurant that even if it's sparkling clean, they're gonna find something because it's their job to find something, right? That's what I feel like he's doing here. And the thing he decided to pick on was that it wasn't the Buddy Holly story and that it was more about these brothers and it was more about the family than it was about the music and the star. That's kind of the point. Maybe he didn't see it. Maybe that is what it is and I'm just recognizing it for something else. That's where subjectivity comes in. But I just don't think that he gave enough reasons why it should be marginally liked. I've seen so many biopics that they liked better, or society liked better, or the Oscars liked better. And this film, in my opinion, was more honest, more sincere, and more concise in its storytelling. It didn't have to hold our hand, and it didn't have to give us a goddamn montage. So therefore, I'm giving Gene a C+.
It's fair. Now, Roger gives a lot of information on this movie, the backstory, the intent. You can tell he's a fanboy, and that's part of my problem with his review is that he gives too much away for people that aren't familiar, that go into this for the first time, that might want to experience, oh man, it was a plane crash. So to me, I don't think we need a history lesson. I don't think a film comparison, fine, you're going to do it. I get it. But it's too much information and not much about the movie itself on why it's so good. Or why it's just marginal, I should say. So, but I do love the fact that he calls it a small movie. And I would take that as a compliment that a small movie on with a biopic, you don't hear that anymore. And it's refreshing to have him articulate that. So I'm on the fence with it, but I think at the end of the day, just because he's giving too much away for people to kind of not go see the movie to be surprised, I think I'm going to give him a bare miss at 2.5.
Okay, I get that a lot. And we've already called him out on the fact that when there's a movie that I'm not going to say challenges him, but he can't say he doesn't like, but he doesn't, champion it like he does other movies. He does exactly what you said. He gives us a history lesson. He gives us the whole synopsis and then fills in more information about what really happened in real life instead of an analysis on the movie. We've seen him do that many, many times. And that's just his style, but I get it. And the 2.5, I think, is a perfect score because it's right in the middle of what I want from him. I appreciate the critique he's giving. And like you said, saying that it's a small movie is a compliment. So therefore, let's focus on why this small movie gives us so much, because that's what it really is all about.
100%. Give me a small movie any time of the week, and let's see what this small topic, small messaging, and small movie can really do to affect you emotionally. And this movie did affect me emotionally.
It's a classic, and I'm going to be watching this movie for the rest of my life. It's just one of those movies for me, and that's why I brought it to the table, because I wanted to show you, man, that you can make a biopic about a musician and not be sensational like Great Balls of Fire or Walk the Line. And with that, next week, we are jumping into Justin's pick. So he is going back to the 80s again. We've been stuck in the 80s for a while. We're going to get out eventually, but he's bringing a controversial comedy classic from the 1980s from a now, I'd say, kind of controversial figure, that being John Hughes. Justin has picked Weird Science with Anthony Michael Hall and Kelly LeBrock and Chet, a.k.a. the immortal Bill Paxton. So I'm actually excited for this conversation because I got the Steelbook and I want to bust it open and get into all those juicy extra features. So I have more to talk about on that episode.
Can't finish the 80s without Weird Science, so you knew this was going to be landed at some point.
Yeah, and at least we're going to get a Hughes out of the way because we haven't done one yet. So
True.
Let's do the outlandish one first before we ever jump into like the more stereotypical high school ones, right? Let's do the crazy one. I like that. So everyone, thank you for listening to Back to the Balcony. Please do us a favor. Go see our content on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, on X. You can find all my stuff on thecultworthy.com. Listen and subscribe to the Cultworthy Cinema podcast. We're already into the new season at this point. Lots of great new guests, including Justin Henson. If you haven't already listened to it, we've done our back to school special like we do every year. It's a lot of fun. Also, don't forget to visit our sponsor, Bulletproof Coffee. Fill up your box, go to the promo code, enter B2B, that's the number 2B, for 20% off your order. It helps us out with the show. And Justin, where can people find you and your stuff?
You can find me anywhere you listen to podcasts at The Movie Wire, and you can check me out at themoviewire.com.
Once again, thank you for listening. Make sure you send us your recommendations. If it's a movie that Siskel and Ebert reviewed on their show and we haven't covered it yet, hit us and hurt us. We want to get some of the crazy ones because no one's really hurt us more than Mikey with his Godzilla 1985. He's calling us out. He wants someone to beat him, so let's do it. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.